Welcome to our LB's The Lover of Books author chat. If this is your first time here live or watching the recording, hello, and thanks so much for joining. Make sure you click subscribe to my channel, LB The Lover of Books. I'll make sure and drop that link in the chat box. I'm finally, y'all, over 1,000 subscribers. So big celebration here. I was so excited to get that. Thank you to each one of you who clicked that button. If you haven't, you still can. I appreciate it if you did. But the real reason why you want to click it is you can subscribe because there are now 50 recorded author chats uploaded. So you're going to find a book that you've already read and you can watch the insights from those authors. And if you haven't read it, that's good incentive to read it and check out because you always find more from these authors. And I feel like the books stay with me so much longer after hearing what goes into them from these. I'm getting to pick these authors' brains. So please check that out. And also leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. I always love that feedback. But now I want to introduce this amazing, amazing author. Allison Pataki is a New York Times bestselling author of this book we're here to talk about tonight, Finding Margaret Fuller. Another book I absolutely adore, The Magnificent Lives of Marjorie Post, The Accidental Empress, as well as a nonfiction memoir called Beauty in the Broken Places, and 2 children's books. But you're going to find even more. She has a great backlist. So if you love this one, you can just dive right in. Her novels have been translated, get this, into 20 languages. So that's amazing. She's a former news writer and producer. She's written for the New York Times, ABC News, the Huffington Post, USA Today, Fox News, and other outlets. She's appeared on, which I'm sure you've seen, The Today Show, Good Morning America, Fox and Friends, Good Day New York, Good Day Chicago, and MSNBC's Morning Joe. She graduated cum laude from Yale University with a major in English and spent several years in journalism before switching to fiction writing. And we certainly are glad she did that. She's a member of the Historical Novel Society, and she lives in New York with her husband and her, is it 3 girls?
3 girls, yes. On the other side
Welcome
of that
so much.
door.
We'll see if they pop in, huh? No.
Exactly.
Thanks so much for joining us. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. We're coordinating in our green to match Margaret.
Exactly. I couldn't help. Like, it's just such a beautiful cover. And we might as well just go ahead and just start with the cover because
Oh
it
yeah.
is a pop piece. What say did you have in it? Did they
Yeah.
bring it to you? Did you have an idea of what you wanted?
Yeah, please judge the book by its cover in this case. So this was a really interesting cover experience because Random House, the team there, Belina Huey's and just the amazing art department at Random House and my editor, Kara Caesar, they really have given me an active role in the cover and in the art and certainly in the title. And so this they always send like a few ideas or images. We brainstorm beforehand to sort of talk about themes, and then they'll send a few images. And often I look at them and there's no clear front runner, and I have to like crowdsource my mom, my mother-in-law, the big readers in my life, my former college roommates, my husband, and there's never a clear front runner. This time with Finding Margaret Fuller, they sent a few image options of the art, and it was just like this one. Like everyone was unanimous, agreed immediately. We just knew there was something about, there was this dynamic quality to it where the woman is staring at something, some bold new frontier, and you get the sense that there's movement. You get the sense that there's a vision like toward the future or toward some vast frontier. And the green, the skirt just popped so much. On the flip side, while this was the easiest art to select, it was the hardest title. We could not land on the title, and we wanted something that would sort of evoke that this was in the same vein as The Magnificent Lives of Marjorie Post, but we didn't want it to be a carbon copy of Marjorie Merriweather Post as the title. And we went back and forth on like, should we have more sort of lyrical or poetic, vague titles that are more like the language? But I really kept coming back to this idea of I want to say her name. I don't think enough people know the name Margaret Fuller. So I'm very happy with how it settled and how we landed. I think it all came together as a really beautiful package. But it was a journey. And yes, my editor and the team gave me a very active voice, for which I'm very appreciative, and I love being a part of the process.
So what did you call this book all along the journey then? Did you just call it Margaret or did you have
I
something?
I called it American Muse because that was the working title I had the whole time, was because she was a muse to Ralph Waldo Emerson. She was a muse to Nathaniel Hawthorne. And we know from reading about Margaret and her conversation series that she hosted for women that the muses were much more dynamic and active in inspiring and creating. They weren't just this passive sort of like thing that sits on the writer's shoulder. They were like goddesses of creation. So I liked that, but Random House said I was not allowed to use the word muse. They said that they had determined that the word muse didn't work. It confused people. They didn't know if they were talking about the ancients. It was like some Greek book. So they said, you're going to have to come up with a different title. American Muse won't work. And I tried to push back and they really weren't having it. So, which like usually they work with me. So, American Muse was out. So then I was like, okay, then I think we need to get her name, into this. But what I wanted to get at with American Muse was that she was the center of this crew. She was the center of this genius cluster, this movement, this moment in time, this clique of great thinkers. And we know all of the names and we don't know hers, and that's the tragedy. That's what I'm working to rectify.
I know, hindsight's 2020 or whatever, but she was an American muse, but that's not all she was. Like I love that her name is forefront and center because we don't know her name, but now we do. And I love the finding part because that was all
Yeah.
of our journey to figure out who she was. And especially the movement, like you said, with the wind and she's holding on. Like it just was there's so much it's like it could be a clip in a film right there. It's just
Oh,
great. I love
yeah.
it. Love it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I do too. Yeah. And the finding piece is like, obviously, we're resurrecting her voice, her legacy. And then it begins with this mad dash effort of Emerson sending Thoreau to New York to find Whitman and, Poe. And they all had to find her body in the shipwreck. And that was true. And I think. My literary agent said it in a good way. She said, your prologue is kind of like you're telling the reader what they're solving for. And for me, so much of what we're solving for is like, wait, all these people were hanging out and living together and friends and writing the American canon. And there's this great, like, human backstory. Like, it's the first season of Friends, Americana style, where they're all like living together as neighbors and friends. And yet, we don't know the human stories behind their stories, even though we know all of their names, we know all of their works. And Margaret was at the center of it all. I wanted people to be like, whoa, how did that happen? And what did I miss here?
Well, and for me, I'm reading this prologue, and I really wanted to start checking history at that point. Like, should I
Mhm.
look it up and see what the real ending to Margaret Fuller? And I'm like, no, don't, because if you like, I really just wanted to stay in it. And so and we are going to talk spoilers. We'll just go ahead and say that this group has read it, and if we don't
Yes.
talk
Great.
spoilers, they will be very disappointed. So
Great.
I'm just going to go ahead and jump in. When we're reading at the end, I'm thinking, is this really going to happen? But the pages are just getting too close to the end. And I'm like, oh no, she really did drown.
Yes, she really
But I mean, that was great
did.
clickbait there at the
And
beginning.
she really did have that fear her whole life of drowning. And also, Lee really did have that family prophecy that were he to leave Rome,
How
he
do you
would
know these
die
things?
at
I mean,
water. The letters that she had this very melancholy tone in the last letters she was writing from Italy. And it's sort of heartbreaking. And she's sort of resigned. You sort of get the sense like, why does she think she's going to die on this ship? And then she does. And it's a hurricane. It's not like something she could have foreseen. And they were stuck on a sandbar off of Fire Island, so close that the people on the shore could hear their voices, could talk. Many people on the ship swam to safety on the shore, but it was a hurricane. It was really rough. And she had her baby and she was afraid of water and she wasn't a strong swimmer. So it was tragic, but that was true. That was actually pulled directly from the history. I couldn't have made that up. It would have been too wild.
so where are her letters? Tell me about the research process.
Yeah.
I want to hear the nitty gritty.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So a lot of her papers are it's interesting. There are some of her papers are at Yale, which is my alma mater, in which I found sort of a lovely like irony in because she was the first woman permitted to study at Harvard. And as a Yale grad, I liked that. And then So this is the interesting thing. They were such copious letter writers. Like you would have Margaret Fuller staying in Ralph Waldo Emerson's home, and her guest room was literally here. And Ralph Waldo Emerson's office was 6 steps away, very close in the house. Meanwhile, his wife is tucked up on a different floor, like at a different wing of the house. But they would write letters back and forth while they were like a room away. So there was this copious opportunity to get a sense of her voice, her tone, their time period, sort of like the textures and the tones of their time period and their daily lives. So I was very lucky in that she was a prolific letter writer. And there are, it's all in the back of the book if you look, but there are some really meaty, good straight biographies on her life. The Meghan Marshall one is great. The John Madison one is great. I loved those two in particular, but really for me, it started in Concord. I went back to Concord and I wanted to retrace her footsteps. And I wanted to walk into the Emerson house, which she called the paradise of thought. When she was there, she would walk into Ralph Waldo Emerson's house and she would be among her intellectual equals and she would be really among her people. That was where she really found people who were on her wavelength for the first time. So I started there because she really, her trajectory and story for me really started there. So I went back to Concord, Emerson House, Old Manse, which was the Hawthorne home, and Orchard House, which was the Alcott home. And I sat on the sun-warmed boulder that is still there that Margaret sat on outside of the Old Manse when she would look out over the Concord River and edit the pages of the Dial, for which she was the first editor. I walked the trails that she walked with Thoreau and Emerson from the Emerson property out to Walden Pond, out to Fairyland Pond, along the riverbanks where she would ride with Thoreau and Hawthorne and through the forests around Concord. So really for me, it was like steeping myself in her world as much as I could. And then it's really about, and then she goes to New York and then she goes to Rome with stops in London and Paris. But then it really became about taking in as much like nonfiction, like meat as I could take in. So I always stick to a diet of just straight nonfiction when I'm researching. So I read all the biographies I could get to on her that had distilled all of her letters. I read the biographies on Emerson. One of the really helpful ones on Emerson and sort of the crew was the Carlos Baker Emerson Among the Eccentrics, because that really gets into their group of friends. Read biographies on Louisa May Alcott. I read Bronson's writings, some letters. Thoreau. I went back in. And something that's so beautiful is that they were also prolific essay writers. So like I could read Walden and hear in Thoreau's first person his perspectives on why he wanted to move out to the woods. So then that helped me sort of distill down his character as he was going to talk to Margaret. So I just read as much of their work as I could. I went back and I reread Little Women. I went back and I reread Scarlet Letter. And another, I'll close with this one. A book I really, really liked was American Bloomsbury. And that is about that moment in time among this group of friends. And it's nonfiction. It's about Hawthorne, Emerson, Thoreau, Alcott, Melville, and Margaret Fuller. And I knew about all of those names. I'd read all their works. I'd studied them in school. I felt like I knew about them sort of as people too, but not Margaret Fuller. And she was the one really for me that leapt off the page among
That's
all.
the book that kicked it off, right? That was a gift that was
That was the book that
handed to you, which you handed to us. So
I was like, how do I not know about this woman? Emerson referred to her as the radiant genius and fiery heart at the center of their circle. She was Hawthorne's inspiration for Hester Prynne. How have I not heard her
I
name? Yeah.
don't know. Like it really blows my mind. And the fact that she's really the founder of American feminism and we don't hear it. Like, why? I mean, she was so revered back at the time. They're having the moment of silence at that convention, but it's like she just disappeared through time. And I don't understand how that can happen because she was so attached to all of these. And it wasn't like she died at 20, she died
Yeah.
at 40.
At
You know,
40.
like that's a long, not a long, but she did so much. It
She
just
did a
blows
lot.
my mind.
But her great work went down in the shipwreck with her. The work that she felt would be the defining work of her life on the Roman Revolution, that went down. And if you think about it, like we know Louisa May Alcott because of Little Women. We know Thoreau largely because of Walden. We know Hawthorne did more, but we primarily know the Scarlet Letter. We know House of Seven Gables, but like she needed to have one great big hit to solidify herself in the canon. And she didn't get that one big great hit. Perhaps it would have been from her writings on women's rights as the decade of the 50s progressed, as the women's rights movement really kicked off because they saw her as their founding mother. We lost her voice too soon before she could do more of what she needed to do.
You're so right. Now, I will ask for another piece of research because you mentioned in the book she was writing in a diary. Did you have
Yeah.
access to that as well, or was that just something you added in?
I did not have access to that, but there where her writings, where I'm pulling direct quotes, like her comments on moments where she's in the Emerson house and how she feels about maybe the dynamic between Emerson and Lydian and herself, those were pulled directly from the scholars who have distilled them and put them into her biographies. And so there were like direct quotes there. And then other times it was more, I was given the bones of the story. Like, so for instance, one moment that sticks out for me is we know that Margaret, Thoreau, Lydian, and Waldo sat down to eat at the Emerson dining table, and Mrs. Emerson asked Margaret if she would walk with her after the meal. And she said, "I'm very sorry, but your husband already asked me if I would walk with him after the meal." And Mrs. Emerson leaves the table in tears. Thoreau follows her out. Margaret gets mad at Waldo for not following her out. And we know that that moment happened. We know that like this delicious tension and awkwardness happened, but I got to then go and just like play and make that scene and put us in there and feel it, feel, and be an eyewitness to that moment in history.
Oh, I think it's fantastic too. I mean, it's so bizarre that they're writing letters with a wall between them, but it's
Yeah,
almost like being able to listen to their conversations
I
because
know.
I mean, what a treasure, but to
Yes.
have that dialogue right back and forth, especially their capacity for thought, it just, I had no idea that was there.
Yes.
Um, Someone, Denise, is going to ask this, and just because we're talking about this tension already, she says, were Margaret and Hawthorne in lust with each other, or was that part made up?
So I did not make that up. Um, I think that there was this interesting triangle with Margaret, Emerson, and Hawthorne. I do not believe, and I did not imply in the writing that they ever physically consummate their relationship. I believe that, yes, there was this sexual tension at times between Margaret and Hawthorne. And, like, for instance, that scene where they're sitting together in the woods and Waldo happens upon them and he gets jealous and he sees them, that was pulled directly from Margaret's writings, that she describes that moment of sitting in the woods with Hawthorne and Emerson happening upon them. They hear him whistling and then he appears from the forest. That, like, so moments like that actually happened. When Mrs. Hawthorne, Sophia, read the first draft of her husband's The Scarlet Letter about this beautiful, brazen, bold brunette who loves to sit, in the woods outside in the exact same places where they are, and embraces the natural, the wild, the bold, sort of like is willing to buck the censure and the pressures of society and the roles that she's been given. Mrs. Hawthorne reads this book and she takes to bed for the rest of the day with a headache because she knew that that beautiful, bold, brazen brunette was not inspired by her. It was inspired by the beautiful, bold, brazen brunette with whom her husband loved to take moonlit strolls down to the water on all of those Concord hot summer evenings. So that was certainly true. But I think with Emerson, Margaret and Emerson, they had this connection of, let's call it like a soulful, intellectual, emotional connection. Some of these things of their like tortured dialogue between one another are pulled directly from the quotes from the history. Their relationship ebbed and flowed. They had times of intense passion and closeness and intimacy. And then they had times where one wanted more and the other one pulled away and it got a bit cooler. But up until the end of her life, Emerson was writing Margaret in Italy, begging her to come home and live with him in Concord. He wanted to set her up in a home right near him. They had this deep, deep connection. They, she was a young woman when she met him. As brilliant and intellectual as she was the most well-read person in America by that point. She was also incredibly naive in the ways of the world and in the ways of men. She had never been courted. She had never had a suitor. I think she was very, very taken with Waldo. And I think he was probably, other than her father, the first man who saw her and understood her, and not only wasn't put off by her brilliance and her brazenness, but loved it and encouraged it and wanted to see it and know it. And so I think that was an incredibly intense relationship and bond between them. And they really did talk about how it sucked to be married once your soul was no longer in it. And she's, like those things were true. And the tension with Lydian, that was certainly true. And yeah, I think they had a very intimate connection. It's true that Hawthorne said that Emerson considered Margaret the one woman worth considering of ancient and modern times. He apotheosized her, Hawthorne said, which means he made her into his goddess. And so, like, those are serious things to say about a married man hosting a beautiful young woman in his home.
Again, why Margaret Fuller isn't kept through history still blows my mind. But, you know, I did love that chaste, like brushing of the hair. It's just, but
Yeah.
it's so like, whoa, yeah,
Yeah.
right there.
It's
It was
forbidden. It's forbidden. One of the biographies that I read in taking up the question of whether or not it was physically consummated said that the only thing more powerful than lust is lust denied. And I think that for them, in many cases, it was a case of lust denied, and truly, I think that they, as transcendentalists, they were looking for transcendent, rapturous experiences. But I think they found rapture in that mental connection they had between them and like being able to talk about the Greeks and the Romans and, like all these lofty ideals, democracy, freedom. I think that for lack of a better word, maybe it was a lot of brain sex that was happening. I've never said that. And that's the first time I've said that, but sort of is like what pops into my head is maybe what was going on.
well, Lydian accuses them of that, right? Because they're always
That's true.
in thought and but never doing. And
Yeah.
but I
And that
think
was true. That list of her commandments, that was true. That was pulled directly, her list of the transcendentalist commandments.
it was, but I mean, that's exactly what she abhors. I'm like, why are Emerson and Lydian together? Why
Yeah.
did they marry when they are so different? He's not
Yeah.
marrying her for money. He already had the wealth from his deceased wife. So what brought them together? Because I don't know that history.
It was like one of those cases of like where you rebound to the exact opposite of what you had. Like I think that so he was really truly madly in love with his first wife. And when Ellen, and when she died, he was truly heartbroken. And I'm not a psychoanalyst. I can't purport to analyze, Emerson's state of mind and his mad grief, but I would suppose that everybody said that Lydian and Ellen were like polar opposites. Ellen was beautiful and artistic and soulful, and Lydian was older and pragmatic and rational and a bit cold and severe and stern. Maybe that was sort of a reactionary thing. I don't know, but I think that you can see that at times she was almost more of like a motherly, maternal figure for him. And she would make like gripes like, oh, my husband runs our house like a hotel. Like she would run out of patience with Emerson, constantly inviting people like Margaret and others to be coming and going. But he was the great sage of Concord. He was really purposefully and intentionally building a community of thinkers there. He wanted to establish Concord as this place where the great thinkers and the great minds of the time were establishing the canon of American thoughts and letters. And this was a new republic. America was only a few decades out from the American Revolution at the time. So he really wanted to rebut Europe and England and sort of like the traditional canon and wanted to come up with a new original American school of thought. And so It took, that wouldn't be easy to be married to someone with that high of an ambition who's also willing to use their home as the center focal point to build that.
And especially because she doesn't feel like she's on par
Yeah.
with that thought. And on top of that, he's really a collector of people. I think he needs that match. He needs to be able to discuss these things for breath, for his survival. It feels like it's like without that, he wouldn't be Emerson. And so it just, he's always looking for that person to
Yeah.
put that transcendental state. It's really fascinating.
It was almost sort of like it was a lab for him, and he's like trying out and talking through and thinking through these great ideas. And Margaret really helps him arrive at what would become one of his most famous and well-known tenets of his thinking, which was self-reliance. And just this idea of rugged individualism and independence of thought, going against the system, bucking, the establishment. Margaret really helps him work that out. He relies on his people, his friends, his guests to help him work these things out.
It's really part of that connection system, this web of thinkers, but they both decide at the same time to run these conversation parlors, hers in the morning, his in the evening. How did you learn about those? Are they documented in some way?
Yeah, and that is true. And the topics that Margaret discusses in her salons and her conversations are pulled directly from her exact, syllabus. And the names of the people who attend are the names of those who actually attended. And one thing that was very well, there were several things that were unique about this. First of all, she was charging money, and she was charging a pretty penny because she wanted to show these women that their brains were a worthwhile investment. You get what you pay for. And she wanted them to see that this was something that was like, that had that value. The second thing was she didn't want it to simply be a salon where she held court and she presented on topics the way a more traditional salon would have been. She said, I know how to talk about what I think. I know how to read and form an opinion and give a speech. I don't want to do that. I want to teach the other women how to talk and form an opinion and debate and argue and maybe not always reach a consensus, but maybe realize that it's okay that you don't have to agree and you can form a conviction and defend it. And so she really encouraged these women to come prepared and to be ready to talk and to be ready to discuss and debate. And she said, you don't always have to be the softer sex that rushes to make everyone else feel comfortable. You are allowed to have your own opinions. You are allowed to use your brain. So that was really a novel model, let's say, for a women's seminar or a women's salon. And Margaret recognized that she had had that opportunity from a young age as a girl with a father who wanted to educate her and who wanted her to read and discuss and debate. But she recognized that most women didn't have access to that. At that point, finishing schools were to prepare young girls to become debutantes and then brides and then hostesses. And so she recognized that women weren't reading the classics. They weren't reading, the Greeks and the Latins. They weren't discussing concepts like character or destiny. And so she wanted women to take on meatier topics. And so that was really groundbreaking when she did that. And yeah, it was very well documented. Her nerves about would anyone go for it? Would anyone pay for it? Needing to find the spot, Eliza Peabody stepping forth and offering her space. That's all taken directly from the history.
And she surrounded herself with someone like Eliza, who also encouraged her to say, this is your worth. This is worth that money. And I think you should put this forward. But it also was very sneaky because we learned through your book that women couldn't get paid to speak in public. What? Like, when did that finally go away? I thought, well, that's clever. She's not, speaking, she's having a conversation. And so that was brilliant to be able to do this in a way and make money.
Isn't that wild? Because Emerson could tour the country charging a really pretty penny for his speeches, and that was largely a huge source of his income. Same with Hawthorne, same with Thoreau. Margaret couldn't do that. So Margaret always had to finance her life and support her mother, her eldest siblings, herself with these really, really demanding jobs like being a teacher or being a governess or being a tutor. And so the material difficulties and the practical like realities of her life, you cannot overstate how much that mattered. She literally needed to provide for the roof over her head, the fuel she could burn during New England winters, food for her mother. So that, she would rise before dawn, sneak in her writing time, then work a full-time job, and then come home and after dark write again. She didn't have a deceased wife's fortune, the way Emerson had. She didn't have the opportunity to live rent-free as a single unwed woman in a man's house the way Thoreau had. She didn't have, a fleet of sisters slipping her food under the door so she could be totally ensconced in her room writing her great work the way Hawthorne had. So Margaret just had a much harder road to walk, and that has to be you have to take that into account when you think about how much she still managed to do.
But as smart as those men all were, they were so thoughtless in paying her. I mean,
No one ever paid her enough.
no one ever paid her.
Killed
And
really,
no,
really did, really did.
really did. Thank goodness for. But I mean, they know her circumstance. They know what it takes for them to live. But
Mm-hmm.
yet they're so willing to just let her work for nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. She was the first editor of the Dial. She was Emerson's choice to be the leader of the charge to his beloved magazine that he was launching, and she never got paid for it. Alcott, oh my goodness. I actually originally had much more about Alcott in there, and Kara Caesar, my editor at Random House, said, because he was wild. It was even weirder. There were some things my editor said, we're risking Alcott like running away with this because he's such a clown in some of these scenes. So we need to like tone it down a little because we get the point, but we want to stay focused with Margaret. So yeah, as wonderful as some of his ideas were, like educating girls, putting young Black and white students together in the same classroom. Like he was really ahead of his time in those ways. And that's what Margaret really loved about and wanted the opportunity to work with him. But still, he seemed to think that she could like survive on eating her thoughts. Like she didn't need coal or bread to survive. And he was always running into trouble. So I don't think he realized how much trouble he was putting her at risk of getting into.
Well, and his own family. I mean, let's just
Right.
constantly was an issue. But it really brought
Uh-huh.
the point. I mean, she was so smart, but how difficult it was for her to talk about her own due compensation. And I thought about that, like how much has changed. And then I think how much hasn't changed in today, even how hard it is for women to want to talk about their what they're worth and their salary and raises and things like that. It's still, very relevant.
Exactly. I had that thought too. I thought, gosh, we're still talking about this and women needing to speak up for themselves and advocate for themselves. It's just harder to do for sometimes women feel that it's more challenging. And so I was thinking, gosh, you have to understand the context though, that Margaret, as strong as she was like a century ahead of her time. But still, like she kept finding herself in these situations where the men around her did not appreciate her value and pay her enough.
Well, and then I immediately made a Taylor Swift connection in the book when, they're judging her for not being married and not having children. And I think, that should be a shocker, but it just happened like a month ago as
Yes.
well. I mean, it's like, really, we're still in the same boat.
Yes, exactly. And Margaret was very open her whole life about she wasn't against marriage and she did desperately want to have a child. She loved children. She just wasn't going to enter into marriage for convenience, out of a sense of obligation, on a level where there wasn't parity. She could only be induced into marriage if it was a true like soul connection and if it was love, not just that it was society's dictate for what her role was as a woman. And so she wasn't going to do that unless she found the man that she like. And then it's ironic because then, for as brilliant as she is, she doesn't anticipate, and I know we're doing spoilers, but she
Yeah.
doesn't anticipate that, hey, this might happen where I might get pregnant. And then she gets married for that reason. So it was an interesting way that it all worked out, but also very interesting that the man she ended up marrying didn't ever read her work and didn't ever have a conversation with her in her native tongue. And that was, maybe that like leveled the playing field in some ways, that she was out of her zone. She was out of her Margaret Fuller celebrity speaking in beautiful, florid English. She was speaking in his tongue. So maybe that's what allowed it. But it was that was an interesting swerve in her trajectory that she certainly didn't see coming.
Well, he definitely fell in love with her, not her work. I mean, because they were head over heels, at least in your novel, that's how I read it. And I assume that's how it went. But it was really a beautiful, because she'd never had that sort of attention and reciprocity
Yeah.
before. I mean, there had been some, like I think Denise mentioned lust, or I think, like you said, that brain sex, but like actual intimacy without even having real, physical contact.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
It was a good fit for her to get to Italy. Everybody said that about her. She was actually an Italian all along. And so then when she gets to Italy, she can sort of put aside the stifling mores and judgment of puritanical Boston. And she could embrace her passion, and she loved the art, and she loved the language. She loved the pageantry of going to St. Peter's. And then she could fall in love and sort of embrace the passion of her side that had never really come out in her Yankee New England circle, where it was just brimming with judgment.
Yeah,
And it
her
was,
Puritan background, as she talks about quite
yeah,
often. I
exactly.
just want this book to land in Taylor Swift's hands. Swifties need to pick this up.
I
Let's
know.
torch. Like, I just think it would be perfect for that next generation of
I'm
feminists to grab.
I'm going to Ocean House in Westerly next week for Deborah Goodrich Royce's Ocean House author series.
Yes,
I'll be like looking out the window at Taylor Swift's house. So I'm gonna have to just like find a way to pass a book along to her book step,
exactly.
to her front step.
Personally picked for you. No, I think it's great. The other thing, and I meant to bring this up earlier, when you were talking about your trek, through Walden, the pond, and the boulder. I know eventually a paperback will be coming out.
Yeah.
I would request a walking map tour for this. I think that would be great
Oh,
for
that's
readers
great.
to have, to see where you tracked, where you think it would be, like different spots for us. And even if
Yes.
you had it the opposite, maybe at the end of the book, that Rome, because there are certain spots for where they met, where their chapel was, like those cool moments of
Oh,
a.
I love that idea. That is so great. And it's something that's so interesting because anybody who says they want to go to Concord, I'm like, yes, do it. It's such a wonderful, Concord just really like recognizes and loves and embraces its history. And I love that. Like was having dinner in the Colonial Inn. I walk out to the Commons, the green in the center of Concord, and there's just a fife and drum corps playing colonial era music. And I was like, what is happening? They were like, oh, it's Concord. This happens all the time. But you love it. You really feel like you step back in time. So I went to the cemetery where they're all buried, Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Concord. And there's Author's Ridge. And you see Hawthorne, you see Thoreau, you see Emerson, you see the Alcotts. They're all buried right next to each other, like all hanging out. And I had the thought, gang is all here except Margaret. Margaret was always just kind of outside of the clique.
Yeah,
And so I would love to sort of retrace her footsteps and put her in Concord and show the places where she touched and lived and wrote.
it's so immersive, and to hear that was your journey when taking in all this information, I just think that would be a cool touch. I also loved how you structured your parts of the book, and you kind of made a reference when her roots outgrew her pot, she moved on. And that's kind of where your parts change too, where her location changes and moves from time to time. And I love that. Why did you decide to place it like that in the book?
Thank you. For me, when I am writing, I I reach those moments where there's like a break and there's a clear like almost like it's the end of an episode and you're like, okay, now we're starting out with kind of a new day. And so for me, it was it was just a pretty intuitive process. It was clear to me where there's going to be like, okay, there's this pause and then it's this new tone and there's this new start. And it's like a fresh page that Margaret is starting. So I've done that with all of my books. And I generally follow just like the intuitive flow of where I think this is the end of a section for her. This is a turning point for her. Um, and so fortunately my editor has agreed with me so far on how I've laid down those tracks.
And is that how you write it? Like chronological?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it often coincides with like a bigger gap in time, though not always, but like where there will be a break of a year or two and you're going to have to do like a quick reset for the reader of where you are. Not always, but sometimes. Formaggi, as Margaret would say when she's in Italy with Ossoli.
I was hungry in a lot of those scenes.
I know, especially in Italy.
Yes.
I will say though, just to your point of how you make the section breaks with Marjorie, I had to be really careful because I didn't want it to just be like, okay, one husband, divorce, next. I didn't want it to be like four sections for four husbands. I was like, this is about Marjorie. This is about her journey.
Great point. I didn't even think of it like that. All right. People, if you have questions for Allison, you now have the chance to ask it. Be thinking of those while you are. We're going to do my infamous rapid fire questions.
Oh, I
Allison,
love a rapid fire
ready?
question.
All right. Massachusetts or New York?
New York. Sorry.
Concord or Cambridge?
Concord. Oh, Cambridge is Harvard.
Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
Plotter or pantser?
Slaughter. Because it's the history, it's the facts. It's like it's there.
Research or the writing?
Both. Both. Both.
More indoor or outdoor?
Outdoor.
Who is your literary best friend? Because she had plenty.
Oh, like actually in real life now or
Yeah,
aspirational?
you could do either, but I'd
Okay.
love to know right now if you have it.
I can't pick one. Oh my goodness.
Multiple. Look how many she
Okay.
has.
So I was just with her over the weekend. So I'm going to say Lauren Willig because I love her and she's a delight. And we were at the library together because we randomly live only a town apart. um, and then I love Sarah McCoy. I told you that. I love Annabelle Monahan. She just is like such a gem, and I love any chance I have to see her virtually or in person. I love Martha Hall Kelly because we are sisters of Kara Caesar is our shared editor. And so we've gotten to do things over the years together. And I just love talking with her always. I love Linda. I could go on. I can't even, I like don't even, I could say like 20 more. So maybe I'll stop now so that I don't like forget.
I did love that. If you want to hear more about her love of authors, the author's note was really sweet. We
Yeah,
talked about
yeah.
that, and that's why I brought up that because I just thought that was the best. And you're right. I mean, readers and authors, I think, are the best people, but that's just mine. All right.
Absolutely. Zibby, we all love Zibby, who does so much for authors, right? She connects so many of us.
Absolutely. All right. Your favorite Little Woman, I should
Oh,
say.
like which production?
Before, no, which of the sister? Well, let's do both. Which
Oh,
of the
oh my goodness.
sisters do you have a favorite? And then do you
Oh,
have a favorite
that is
production?
such a great question. Okay, well, Beth is clearly the nicest, right? I think we can all agree that Beth is like the one we'd all most want to be with if we needed a hug. But I got to go with Jo because she is the writer who sets out on her path. And people feel that many scholars think that Jo was largely inspired by Louisa May Alcott watching Margaret Fuller's life, watching her leave Concord the way Jo leaves Concord to go to New York to write the way Jo leaves to go to New York to write, fall in love with a European. So I got to go with Margaret Fuller's character, Jo.
And we have another vote. Mindy voted Jo in the chat box, but we also find out that clue that the character was changed to Margaret
Yeah, which
for
is
one of the Little Women, like in tribute.
so interesting. Yeah, the
Yeah,
eldest sister was Anna.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
crazy. Poor Anna. She just got. All right. Do you have a favorite transcendentalist?
Oh, great question. So because Margaret will not count in
That's
this.
what she's just Margaret. Like she's her own.
I have got to say, I just love Thoreau. I listened to him like an audiobook, and I just want to walk in the woods and go to Walden Pond with him. And I just loved writing him. I loved him as a character. So I'm going to go with Thoreau.
Perfect. England, France, or Italy?
All of the above, all of the above. And actually, my mother is English and French by like nationality, and my father has Italian. So I have a little bit of each.
All right.
I am a total Francophile. So, like, as you can see, I've written Nellie Takes New York and Poppy Takes Paris. My grandmother was a French war bride. She fell in love with my grandfather when he was in North Africa fighting the Nazis. And she was a young French woman living in like Casablanca, literally, in Morocco. And she was a French woman through and through her whole life. She later told me that she regretted marrying my grandpa and having my mom and being my grandma because she missed France so much that if she could do it over again, she wouldn't. And I'm like, Grandma, I don't think I'm the right person for you to be telling this to. Um, but just she instilled in us such a love of all things like French, like cheese and wine, and just enjoying ice cream and food and all things French culture. So I feel very connected to all things French. So I'll go. That was a long answer. I love them all. I love Italian food, but I'll go with France.
And now I'm even hungrier. So thanks a lot. Well, that's all my rapid fire
I
questions,
love
but we
that.
already have some people in the queue. So I'm going to go ahead and start your first question.
Hi, it's very nice to meet you. I have been reading you since your very first book about Elizabeth of Austria, and I've loved all of them. I just want to say you nailed Bronson Alcott in this book. I loved how you were not afraid to expose him for all of his flaws, because I am not a fan of that man, never have been. I have to keep quiet though because of anyway, I don't want to get barraged by, critics who, oh, he was wonderful. No, anyway, so I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate how you bring out women who have been overlooked, especially like Margaret Fuller, because um, I teach history and I had never really explored who she was. And I was so, okay, I did cheat because I had to look up what happened to her. And so I knew what was coming and I was still horrified. I was like, no, no, they save her. And so I was bummed at the end of the book, but thank you for being historically accurate.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm so thrilled you enjoyed it. That's funny that you have to keep it quiet about Bronson. Yeah.
You're not.
Your editor told you the same thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Let's go to the next person. Anissa, go
Hi,
ahead.
LB. Hi,
Welcome.
Allison.
Hi, Anissa.
It's funny you said that about being with Lauren Willig. I had lunch today. M. Judson had a lunch, and I was with Beatrice today. So I saw
Oh,
part of Team W today, and actually was talking to Annabelle earlier today.
oh,
So the people you're talking about are my people too. And
I know.
I fortunately got to meet Allison in April, I think it was, at Foxtail. And if you've never got to see Allison in person, please try to. She is a great speaker in person, and have really really enjoyed it. But what I love so much about this book, Allison, was just that Margaret was was the first female that did so many things, but yet probably none of us before we read this book knew anything about her at all. So I love that you find these women that you need to tell the story, and like so many historical fiction writers talk about that, that if these things aren't written down for us of this generation, and and the younger whatever, those people kind of would be lost because no one would read about them. And I love that you, especially like this one, which is but I love Marjorie's probably my favorite book of yours. There's just she's just, I mean, Margaret's great too, but Marjorie was Marjorie, I guess, and just but
Yeah.
so my question about this book is, what was your favorite scene to write in this book, and why?
Oh, what a great question. I've never been asked that one. Marjorie is the one that I could see Taylor Swift playing in like a series, right? I feel like Marjorie and Taylor Swift would have a lot in common. It's,
Yes,
it's
I
like
think so.
boss women. Um, my favorite scene, that is so good. I don't even know if I could pick one, but I think I will go with Well, I loved her befriending Georges Sand in Paris because that was a very significant moment in her life where she saw an emancipated woman and she wore pants and she lived with her lover unashamedly. And the people around her not only didn't ostracize her, but they celebrated her. And so Margaret is sort of like tiptoeing towards being willing to be bad and being willing to like face the judgment of her people. And so I loved the interchange with Georges Sand. And then I I loved, as heartbreaking as it was, I loved her moments during the Roman Revolution, being there with Osily, living through that night where they saw the blood on the walls and so many of Osily's like comrades in arms had fallen. And she really did make her way out to the fort and spent the night there with him. And that was incredibly brave of her and sad and tragic. And she's thinking, gosh, this is so sad because we as Americans love freedom and we love democracies and we're just letting them flounder here and we're letting it fail. I was writing that tragically at the same time that Russia was invading Ukraine, and so it was like very poignant to me, and it still is. So I really loved dwelling in the time with her in Rome. I found that incredibly moving. And then I don't know if I could pick one, but I loved the scenes of her first days in Concord, where she's first finding herself, finding her voice, as a thinker, as a writer. Some of the scenes that were pulled directly from the history of them impulsively deciding, like, hey, it's almost sunrise. Let's walk out to watch the sun rise over Walden Pond. Those were true. So that's a really long answer, Anissa. And I don't really think I answered it. I think I cheated. But Rome,
Perfect.
let's say Rome and Concord. And then the frenemy sparring with Poe in New York. I'll throw that in
Oh,
too.
to me, that was like the original mic drop. I was
Yeah,
just
because he
like, three
really
steps.
did. He called her Margaret Fuller, and he was so nasty to her, and she really gave it right back.
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. Great question,
Thank
Anissa.
you for that answer. Now, and when you go to the Ocean House, when you see Deborah go to Troy's, give her a hug from me. She's
I
she's
will.
so much fun. I love her.
I will. I'll
Thank
tell
you,
her.
LB. I appreciate these
Of
events
course.
you put on. You bring great events for readers. Thank you, LB. And LB, I'll see you soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Anissa. Definitely. All right, Liza, you are up. Go ahead.
Well, hello. Hi, Laura Beth, and hi, Allison. And I think I commented somewhere that, I actually first was introduced to your books when I was in Vienna, in Hofburg Palace, Imperial Palaces, and touring, like, Sissy. And then I saw your book. I'm like, oh, this looks great. And so I picked up your book on Sissy and obviously in Vienna and have been a fan since. So amazing. So thank you for all of it. And I'm working through your books and I'm excited to read so much more.
Thank
And
you.
definitely fell in love with Margaret. So my question is, and you've sort of maybe kind of answered in parts already, but obviously there's so many secondary characters. But I wonder, and obviously you're a big fan of Thoreau, right? But who else, like if you were to write a separate book about somebody else, right? Like who else would you love to write about out of that cast of characters, both in America and in Europe?
I was very taken with Elizabeth Barrett Browning when she welcomes Margaret to Florence and she says, no woman has arrived in quite as much scandal since I arrived, because she eloped with Robert Browning and eschewed the society marriage that her family wanted for her. And they really did go on to have a really beautiful love story and marriage. And I had read their love letters, their poems back and forth to each other back in college. I don't know why, but I've always had a thing for Elizabeth Barrett Browning. So then that was another thing. I read her biography, I read about her life, and I really enjoyed their friendship because I think you can understand why in that moment in time they connected the way they did. Their babies connected. They were both kind of living there in exile, women, free thinkers, loved but also shunned in some corners. And so I loved their connection. And really true to the history, as I put in the book, she spends her last night in Italy, in Florence, with Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Elizabeth would have given her the money for a better boat. She declined the offer. And she really did give Elizabeth kind of the heebie-jeebies that night in their departure. She she seemed to imply that it was like the last time they would speak and see each other. So all that's pulled directly from the history. So I found their relationship to be fascinating.
So thank you.
And she kind of inducts her into the club. It's almost like she welcomes her as well as George Sand. Like it's the
scandalous women
longing. Like I love that.
Yeah, she says nobody reads the books about the boring women who follow the rules, and she kind of gives her permission to be a strong woman.
Well, you definitely don't write any books about those women. So absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I will go ahead and follow up with, can you talk about the next historical character that you're going to be telling us about next?
Yes, I'm working on it. I sent the draft out. Kara Caesar, my editor, has it. Right now it's loosely titled It Girl. And we're going to be in America again. We're going to come to the 20th century this time. It's a little more recent history. It's the dawn of the 20th century. And it's the life of Evelyn Nesbit. So Evelyn Nesbit was known as America's first It Girl. She was kind of like Marilyn Monroe, but decades sooner. She came of age. As a young girl, she actually lied about her age to say she was older. She was really only like 15 or 16, but she came of age in New York as this artist's model at this critical moment in time where art and advertising and pop culture and papers and magazines are switching from art over to photography. So she captures the imagination and the public like obsession and craze as the number one artist model or muse at the dawn of the 20th century. And she becomes the Gibson girl. So if you can conjure that image to mind of that beautiful black and white pen and ink drawings that Charles Gibson, the artist, did of the perfect woman, with the beautiful dark bouffant hairdos, and you would recognize them if you saw them, the Gibson girl. It was every man wanted her, every woman wanted to be her. Well, Evelyn was the Gibson girl. She was the model. She was he did this one iconic image of her where she's in profile and her beautiful brunette hair forms a question mark, and he writes woman, the eternal question. She was not a woman. She was a girl. But anyway, she gets plucked from obscurity because of her stunning beauty, and she gets put into this role of model, and then she becomes a Broadway star, and she gets discovered by Stanford White, this iconic architect who built much of New York City, built like Madison Square Garden, built the Arch at Washington Square, built much of Columbia University. He was known as the Pharaoh of Fifth Avenue. He was the most powerful man in like the New York Architecture Society world. And he and she begin this relationship. At that time, it was kind of like they were known as benefactors and the girls were known as proteges. And she was half his age, but he, like these young showgirls, like a Marilyn Monroe story, she launches to fame. She's the most recognizable face in the country. Everyone is obsessed with her. And ultimately what happens is she moves along from Stanford White. She gets married, and her husband shoots and kills Stanford White, her lover, in a fit of rage on the rooftop of Madison Square Garden in front of all of New York high society. And it became known as the crime of the century. And it was so salacious and so like such a feeding frenzy that President Teddy Roosevelt had to ask the papers to stop writing about it because it was such a big deal. And so it was like, you've got like the Princess Diana kind of dynamic, you've got a Marilyn Monroe kind of dynamic, and yet so few people know Evelyn Nesbit, the story and the moment in time and the history around her. And so it's a little bit darker. It's juicy, it's sexy, it's dramatic. Her husband was the man who gave the term Playboy, because he was, which I won't get into, but she's got her husband, got her lover. She's in the middle of it. She was known as America's Eve. And again, this trope of like the woman driving the men to this bad behavior, the women causing the fall. She was too beautiful. They were driven mad by their desire for her and their love for her, and her husband needed to avenge her honor. And it's like all of these tropes. And so I'm exploring all of that. It's really, it's juicy, it's thorny, it's complicated. And the working title right now is It Girl.
Good girl. I was going to say, is it America's Eve?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that one of the biographies about her is actually called American Eve. If you know the story Ragtime, or The Girl in the Red Velvet Swing, that was her. So people have like a vague understanding of her or touchstones to her, but nobody knows like, or not enough people know her name and like know the extent of this story. But it is it is really wild.
Well, you have mastered the pitch because the chat bot, it's blown up. Everybody's so
Ah!
excited for it. I will also ask, because we always want to know, and I should have warned you about this question, but what books would you recommend that we read that you have loved? It can
Okay.
be a classic, it could be something that hasn't come out yet, it could be just what's on your nightstand. We just like to know what you're reading and would recommend.
Ooh, oh, I love that. Okay, so since I plugged it, I just finished the Annabelle Monaghan summer romance because I saved that for like high summer. Um, on my stand, actually, I'm starting this one tonight. It's an ARC, an advanced reader copy by Penny Hoff, Follow Me to Africa. I'm excited to read this one. It's not out yet, but I'm really, really looking forward to that. And then I want to read, well, I just finished The Women last week, Kristen Hanna. She always she always gets you right in the heart. That one was beautiful, and I actually hadn't read a lot of historical fiction set in the Vietnam era, so that was really interesting and that was different. I just recently finished Beatrice Williams' Husbands and Lovers, which I know Anissa's nodding her head. um and then so those are more like recently out, and I would say if you haven't yet read it, one of my all-time favorites that I could just read over and over again that like moves me so deeply, no matter what point in my life I revisit it, is War and Peace, Tolstoy. I would say that's one of my all-time favorites. It just makes me cry every time I read it.
Oh, thank you
Like
for the
women,
recommendation.
broken
I
human.
will. I want to plug one of your backlist books too. So if someone is totally in love with Margaret Fuller, finding Margaret Fuller, which book would you point to next?
I would say do the Cece books because Cece's having a moment right now. So I would say start with the Accidental Empress because there's two of them, and then Cece Empress on her own is the second.
Do you have a few more minutes just because Anissa raised her hand? So I was going to give her just one more second. I know we're a few minutes over. Are you okay,
Yeah.
Allison? Okay, yeah. Can you unmute Anissa? Let's see. there you go. You're good now.
Good.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, as Allison was saying the books, there was one that I wanted to recommend to you, Allison, that I really enjoyed, and I noticed that in a clip today on something that Jenna Bush Hager recommended it too, but Sandwich by Catherine Newman. It's only like 220 pages, and it's one of those books to me that's like every single word was important. It's just like it's just like I said, it's a really, really fast read, but I really enjoyed it. I think it was the ARC, and I sent it off to someone the other day when I was doing a package, and it's one that I really, really enjoyed.
Yeah, I am going away with my family next week and I want to read that when I
Yeah,
go.
it's a quick read. It's enjoyable. You'll have to let me know what you think about it. And I like you said, summer romance. I love summer romance. I think it's Annabelle at her absolute best, and I think it's just such a great, 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 great book. Our book club actually is having her next week, and I can't wait to get to dive deeper into it with her. So, but I just wanted to say that about Sandwich because just it really resonated deeply with me, and it's a very interesting book, and it's a good, very, very well written book.
Oh, I've heard such wonderful things about it. I've heard you, LB, you said it was the book of the summer.
Yep, I
Yeah,
did. You've been
yeah,
looking at my Instagram.
I
I think
sure do.
I
Yeah,
must have missed that you saying it, LB, because I've been saying it for a while too. So, obviously,
yeah, it's good
people in
getting
the same
a
book
lot of
club always have like minds.
it's
So,
that's
getting
right.
a lot of good buzz for sure. And then the other
yeah.
one, Jenna's last book was All the Colors of Darkness.
Yeah, that's this month. Yeah, and
Yes,
she recommended 5 today, just if you'd already finished Chris Whitaker, but she recommended Courtney Sullivan's new one, The Cliffs.
yeah,
So more to it that I think it is just The Cliffs. Um Bear, Julia Phillips,
yes, yes.
Um,
Sandwich.
I can't remember.
Yeah, it's on her Instagram, but yeah, she recommended 5 just that if you had finished. But Chris Whitaker's book, I mean, we could talk about that for a gazillion years. I mean, both of his books have just been, his last 2 books have just been amazing. I mean, his characters are just amazing.
I'm putting those on my list now. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, LB.
And I will go ahead and plug because Chris Whitaker will be joining us September 8th, y'all. So you'll want to get that book purchased, on holds, whatever, because it is extremely popular. He'll be joining the LBs for a conversation. It's going to be earlier than normal, so like 2 p.m. because he is in the UK. So excited for that one. But I am just so excited, Allison, that you joined us tonight. Thank you so much. I so appreciate this. If please join her on Instagram. She has excellent posts. I want to say, wish you well on your travels with your family, and enjoy. Hopefully you have lots of time to read. But our next author chat is in 4 weeks. We're going to be chatting with the amazing Joyce Maynard. Y'all, she is, if you haven't read her stuff, you definitely need to. The book we're going to be discussing is called The Bird Hotel. But we're also going to get just a quick preview into her newest, How the Light Gets In. And this is a follow-up to her book, Count the Ways, which I absolutely loved. But I'm going to let the author of American Dirt, Janine Cummins, convince you to read this one. This is her book. In The Bird Hotel, Joyce Maynard imagines a glorious landscape where one broken woman, Irene, must lose herself in order to find the hope of survival. Although it's Irene whose heart-stopping tale drives the narrative, this is also a rich ensemble novel about endurance, courage, healing, and the salvation of human generosity. The glittering, unexpected ways in which we save each other every day, despite all the reasons not to. Much more than just an expat novel filled with memorable characters of all stripes, The Bird Hotel is a careful love letter of discovery and a reminder that life can provide the antidote to suffering if you're open, patient, and you know where to look. If that doesn't convince you to read The Bird Hotel, I don't know what will, but I think it's fantastic. I hope you can join us. Again, Allison, this has been so fantastic. When will the next book? Do you have kind of a ish time?
Yes, so it's going to be not this February, but the following one. So early 26.
Okay, early. We'll definitely keep a lookout, and we'll look to your Instagram for all the news on that. Let us know how we can help promote that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, please find me on social. Please find me on social media.
Exactly. On her social media. She also has a great PDF book club kit on her website. So if you want to take this book and recommend it to your book club, you can pull that down, and that makes for great discussion. So check that out as well. As I said, I put the link for the YouTube in there. You can check out other author chats. I'm sure you're going to find something that you love. But again, Bookstagram, you're going to find all the recommendations, reviews. But I can't wait to see everybody in 4 weeks, y'all. Have a great summer.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.